Okay, April 2014, Metro Detroit Linux User Group. Kevin O'Brien on LibreOffice Calc.
Calc, yep.
April 12th.
What did I say?
14th, you said.
April 2014. That's what I said.
2014.
Yeah. So anyway, whoop. Get back. You know, there have to be geeks about every topic in the world. I'm actually an Office Suite geek. So now you've met one. And actually I started outside of open source. I was on the faculty and staff over at Concordia in Ann Arbor, and I developed training at what at the time was Microsoft Office. I think I started with Office 97.
Wow.
And then we had a degree completion program for older students to finish up their bachelor's degree, and they asked me to put together a seminar that covered all of this stuff so that students could demonstrate that they had some proficiency, which I did. And I just mention that because a lot of what I do is not specific to the LibreOffice suite. There are just a lot of things. In the first place, all Office suites work essentially the same. You know, the overlap on features and methods is like 95% at this point. The biggest difference is, fortunately, LibreOffice never adopted the ribbon. Thank God. I hate the ribbon. So, you know, it's something I've been doing for a while. And then I started, I decided to take the goal of trying to do a series of tutorials, which I wrote up and placed on my website, which is the URL at the top here, ahuka.com. That's a website that I own and control. And if you go there, you will see a fairly lengthy list of tutorials on Writer, and about a half a dozen so far on Calc, and I'm in the middle of writing up another one that in another day or so will probably go up. And then I've also been recording all of these things as a series of MP3 files for a podcast called Hacker Public Radio that you may be familiar with. So if you go there and, you know, if you like to listen to podcasts, like I have a very long commute, so I listen to a lot of podcasts. You know, you can download that. So I just, you know, mention if you like the approach I take, you can get more of it. And if you don't like it, well, you know, just move on to the next thing. So, Calc. Calc is a spreadsheet. Now, spreadsheets have been around for a long time. The first spreadsheets were paper and pencil. Having started off in finance many years ago, you know, I remember getting these big pads of green paper with columns and lines, and you know, you did all sorts of numerical stuff on them. And I actually had a fair amount of experience doing that because I was a financial manager. Then, as people started looking more at automating, there were spreadsheet programs created for mainframes. They were some of the first computerized programs. But the personal computer spreadsheet was the first killer app. Back when, you know, you may remember that famous quote from I was going to go with the Tom Watson one, who said that he only saw, and he saw that the world only needed like 5 or 6 computers.
I've heard that.
But that was back when computer meant a mainframe that had its own building with climate control and all of that kind of stuff. And from that perspective, that's probably true.
There's probably only 5 of those left, right?
No, you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Mainframes are out there. They're still a perfectly valid technology, you know, for certain use cases. But at the time when that was considered the state of the art in computing, personal computers were just considered toys. You know, no one was serious, whatever, until VisiCalc. VisiCalc was available on the Apple II, and all of a sudden you had companies deciding it was worth purchasing Apple IIs to put on people's desktops.
Did VisiCalc come out before WordStar?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. I'm guessing if you went to Wikipedia, you could probably research that. Then, you know, IBM came out with their personal computer, the PCXT. It was one of the very early IBM computers.
That had a hard drive.
Not initially.
The PC was the one that didn't have the hard drive. The XT was the hard drive one.
The original XTs, I think, were twin floppy. At least the
No,
one
they
I had
had
was.
10 megabyte hard drive.
Okay. Well, one I had was a twin floppy, 360K 5 1/4 inch drives. So you boot DOS from your floppy disk, and then once you were booted, you could take it out because it was all in memory, and then you put in the disk for your program, and then the other drive was for storing your data. And at that point, Lotus became the big spreadsheet program. Lotus was very successful. It was a state-of-the-art program. It was a DOS program. So if you had a monochrome monitor, you were running Lotus. And then Microsoft purchased Excel. It was an independent program originally, which they had then aimed at Apple computers. And then when they went to Windows, they started developing Excel there. And Microsoft's pretty good at using their market power to get rid of competition. So there used to be a joke, Windows isn't done till Excel won't run, until Lotus won't run. I mean, so whether or not that was exactly true, the idea was that they would use their special knowledge of Windows to make sure Excel ran beautifully and Lotus somehow was buggy and crash prone. So then in Germany, there was a group called StarOffice that decided they wanted to develop something that was aimed at education. And so the StarOffice suite had word processing, spreadsheet, and presentation and stuff like that. Very reasonably priced. I remember getting a friend of mine who was running IT for a small and extremely poor parochial school. They had no money, and I said, you know, for $50 or $100, whatever it was, I can get you a site license for StarOffice. Whereas, you know, Microsoft wanted, you know, $300 a seat. Well, StarOffice was then purchased by Sun Microsystems and turned into OpenOffice. And under Sun's control, OpenOffice didn't seem to be progressing terribly fast. So I mean, it was nice that it was open. I mean, StarOffice was a proprietary for sale product. Sun turned it into an open product. That's good, but they never really put a huge amount of resources in it, and they didn't really want to let the community get too involved in
Didn't
running
they
it either.
open it before they changed the name? Because I seem to remember Sun offering StarOffice for free.
Yeah, that might. I don't remember exactly which order that happened in. But anyway, Sun was then bought by Oracle. And pretty much anyone involved in open source fled at that point. And so the LibreOffice is a fork from OpenOffice.
Right.
And then they set up the Document Foundation, which oversees all of this, which is a nonprofit, and I regularly throw a few bucks at them because they do good work. And that gets us to where we are today with the LibreOffice suite. And so, like I say, this is about 95% identical, whether you're looking at LibreOffice, OpenOffice, Microsoft Office, WordPerfect Office, or any of the others. They really all do pretty much the same thing in the same way. And the reason that matters is if you learn the right way to think about this stuff, you can sit down in front of any of these programs and be productive very, very quickly. You know, I was once asked to do a presentation, a training session for a group of people on the presentation. I don't even remember what the name of it was, but the presentation program in the WordPerfect suite, which I had never even looked at. So I said, well, give me a copy of the software. And I spent a couple of hours just going over it and said, oh, okay, I'm ready. Because I already had all of the concepts in mind. I knew what I wanted to do. All I had to do was just say, okay, what menu did they stick this in? Because I knew what I wanted to do. And if you learn it that way, and that's the basics of a lot of the stuff that I do, is to think about this the right way. So how do we think about a spreadsheet? The first thing that you want to understand is that it was designed to do mathematical calculations. That's what spreadsheets were designed for. Now, people use them to do a lot of stuff.
Stuff that they weren't designed to do.
Well, yeah. Did you know you could type a term paper in this?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, you can. It will be one huge mother of a cell, but it is possible to do it. More commonly, people will do database stuff.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that you run into the limitations because this was never designed to be a database program. So you hit a ceiling really fast and then you get frustrated. Now, you know, I can show you some simple database stuff that's, you know, that's okay. You know, if you're the church secretary and you want to keep the address list for the church in a spreadsheet, you know, there's probably no great harm in doing it that way.
No.
But you'll have a lot more flexibility if you actually use a database, because then when you want to do labels, you want to combine things from two different tables, you know. You can't do that in Excel, in Calc, you know, any spreadsheet program. You've got to do that in a database. So that's one of the mistakes people make. So here we have a cell. The cell is A1. So we have a series of columns. They go alphabetically. And then if you run out, you know, they start doubling up, AA, AB, AC, and so on. And then you get a bunch of rows with the numbers. And the addresses always do letter first, number second. And that's been a standard. I mean, you're looking at what we did with Lotus in DOS 30 years ago. And it hasn't changed. So, this little name box tells me what cell I'm in. But it also allows me to jump to a particular cell if I type in the cell address and hit enter. Now, what are we going to put in a cell? Well, numbers frequently. But there's more than that. If we take a look at the formatting options, You could create a user-defined one if you wish. I'm not going to get, that's more advanced than we want to get to. Here's a number thing. And then you can choose things like decimals. You know, this has 2 decimal places. Negative numbers, do you want a minus sign or do you want parentheses around it? Those are 2 of the common ways to denote negative numbers. Or is it going to be a percent? So we can formulate it that way. You know, decimal 0.13 is equivalent to 13%, so on. We format it as currency. Now with currency, there's a convention that negative numbers are often represented by red font. You know, but you can decide if that's something you want to do. If it's something you're going to print out and you're not using a color printer, that would be a very poor choice. Date. Right? A lot of ways we can have dates in here. Then time. Scientific. Now this is one of those things that occasionally trips people up. Because sometimes you'll put in something that will just convert itself to scientific when you didn't want to. Mm-hmm. So that's why going in to format the cell to specifically say this is the format. In other words, if you just type stuff into cells, you're saying to the program, you figure it out. You figure out what I'm trying to do. And I'll tell you, we have not perfected the telepathy interface yet for computers. They're working on it. No, they are working on it. I'm reading right now Michio Kaku's book, The Future of the Mind. Okay. Fascinating. They are really working on mentally controlling computers.
No, I can see applications.
How do you think Stephen Hawking writes his books?
Howdy, welcome.
So,
just pick a chair anywhere, Drew.
One here power outlet.
So there's power outlet over here. There's one over here. One over there. That's your choices. Yeah, I have an extension cord. So anything you want to do about moving the extension cord, it's all yours.
Yeah, I have one over here.
Now, this is an interesting one. You can actually format fractions to show up as fractions rather than decimals. Boolean. There are certain functions that you have that can do a, you know, true or false. Think about Boolean. The joke is a programmer was telling her friends, I'm pregnant. And the friends say, a boy or a girl? And she says, true.
Yeah, hey, you want to
Hope so.
I had to explain that one to my wife, though. She's not a programmer.
Not a squirrel. Not a
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And finally, text. Now, I just said that spreadsheets are about calculations. This is the format that people don't use and should more often than they know. Because when is a number not a number?
Mm-hmm.
When it's a label. Telephone number 734-224-8520. I wouldn't use that in a calculation anywhere, would you? No, that's not. It's a label. It doesn't have to be a number. It could have been a passphrase, a series of letters. It could have done anything. They just decided that numbers was convenient. Those things are not really numbers. But if you have them formatted as numbers, it will eventually cause you grief. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that people often do with spreadsheets is move data in and out of databases. And when you get your data into a database, and usually it's like using a CSV file as the intermediate, common separated values. With databases, it really matters a lot what those things are. It can matter somewhat in here as well. And it also starts mattering a lot when you get to doing analysis, because one of the things that you do in spreadsheets a lot is you do graphs, you do functions, stuff like that. And you can do mathematical calculations on certain things that look like numbers and get results that are just stupid. I annoyed the Six Sigma group at St. Joe's Hospital some years ago because I went to a presentation. One of their Six Sigma people was doing a presentation of this research project that they had done, and they had graphs and data and all of it, and I just said, it's crap. 3 of these graphs are completely invalid. You can't even do that kind of graph with this kind of data to get anything meaningful. And your data's, it's just stupid little stuff, because if you don't know what you're doing and you just start clicking buttons, you can convince yourself that you're doing something profound when you're just being stupid. So, understanding what this is, when we get into analysis and graphing, the very first thing I do is, are we dealing with qualitative or quantitative data? It makes a difference. And just because we put numbers on it, like, in social science data, you might survey a bunch of people, and you might record sex. And you might say male 1, female 2, doesn't matter, could be the other way around. It's just a label. I've had students calculate the average of the sex variable. I don't know what they thought that was telling them. You want to go for standard deviation while you're at it.
Say, Kevin, that text is designed like a label. You can't make a sentence or a paragraph. It's just to make a label, right? So it shouldn't be labeled. Called label instead of a text.
Well, you would call it text if it was not a number that could meaningfully be used in a calculation.
Okay, but the text then is limited in how many characters or sentences? Or
No.
You can write a whole paragraph?
You could write a whole article.
With the text in it.
Yeah.
So you can use it as a writer then, instead of...
You can.
There's probably a limit somewhere, but I don't.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. There's a limit to how many characters or how many sentences or how many periods?
Nope.
There is a tendency to use whatever tool you know. And that's not always bad, but it's like if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
So you put everything in one cell. You can put a whole paragraph in one cell.
Sure. And I've done it. There's time. I'm a project manager, and
Isn't there a 255 character limit that they do away with that?
oh no, there's for certain database fields you'll run into that, but not on these cells, because I've done way more than that.
There may have been limits from older versions of software for
yeah,
various
that's possible.
types of things.
Yeah.
I'm sure that the limits have constantly been increased and increased with various versions of
Right.
software. Right.
What extension are the Excel Calc files? Like in Microsoft, you got .xls or
ODS.
OES?
OD.
ODS.
OD, because OD is open document.
Overdose?
Open document.
Open
Oh,
document.
yes.
So if it was a writer, it would be ODT, open document text. And for Calc, it's ODS, open document spreadsheet. And for Impress, it's ODP, for open document presentation.
What's the?
I want to evangelize a little bit here. So we have to be knowledgeable. At least in our group, we're open source kind of leaning people. There's folks out there who don't get the concept of they're using a certain version of software that works with a certain format of the data. They just think I have this software and it does what I need it to do without understanding the details, right? So you can use a version of a software that uses a certain type of format and then use a different type of format. You can use an older version of Windows, to use maybe like an older version of Microsoft Word to save off a file in a format that the old version of Word uses, and then move up to a newer version of Windows with a newer version of Word that uses that older format of the file, right? And then you could save the file in a newer format using that newer software, right? So the versioning and the format don't necessarily, mean the same thing. You have to understand that you can have different formatting, under different standards, under different, methodologies based on what the software is capable of. The open software, like Calc, can do other types of versions of file formats.
So you could, while using this, when it saves it to ODS, you can say to save it as an XLS.
Yeah, remember?
To some degree.
Remember originally I had sent you out the SIG Linux spreadsheet
Yeah.
in ODS, and you
Right.
said I can't read this, and I said, okay, I guess I'm going to have to save these as XLS
Okay,
for
so you
guys.
converted it right off of that. You're able to save it as XLS.
Right.
So that's the same thing. If you have all your XLS in Microsoft, you
can
can save it as ODS.
You can create macros, and when you create macros is where it gets really hairy, because the macro languages are different, and so they frequently do not translate, or they
Right.
translate in a very buggy way. If it's strictly data, the Rosetta Stone for all spreadsheets is comma-separated values, CSV. You can exchange anything if you go through CSV. And you can even open it up in a text editor and you'll just see
Quotes
each of your
and
fields
commas
with commas between them. I mean, that's what it means. I once, when I was at Concordia, I had a faculty member who had data that was like 15 years old. The program that created it didn't even exist anymore. And it was like, oh, well, I really need to get my data. And I ended up bouncing it through like 5 intermediate programs before it was in something he could load in SPSS. But it was doable if you took some time and puzzled over it. I said, okay, now what do I do?
Yeah, we had software that we were decommissioning, and we had to save the data. The data had to be readable for a longer period of time. It had to be
Right.
readable until the last person whose information was in the database had been dead for 20 years, something like that. So
Okay.
we dropped it into an ASCII file. Of course, now you ask, okay, what version of ASCII and things like that, but
All right, so we've got our cells, we've got our cell addresses, we know something about formatting them, and that was on the format cells in case you. Now you can format a column, or a row, but really what you're looking at there is just like sizing stuff. If you wanted to format all the cells of a column, what you do is you click on the letter, and you see that highlights the entire column, and then you would go and format all the cells of that column. So I could say, I want those all to be text. Right? So, 1,048,576 rows. In case you were wondering. Now someone from Redmond might come along and say, well, Excel has more rows than that. It's like, if 1 million rows isn't enough for you, get a life. Now, let's put in some numbers. Okay, why did that just freeze up on me? Oh. I
You have to justify it, huh?
That's the other thing, if you put an apostrophe in front of a number, that treats it as text as well. I knew something was formatting it as text because it was left aligned instead of right aligned.
Well, I see one of the conventions commonly is to have the first row, the title for the row.
Yeah, that can be. So I've got a couple of numbers here. If I wanted to add them, this thing is the sum. Now, that is a capital sigma from Greek, sigma being the equivalent of S for sum. Fairly common.
I use this more than any other thing in spreadsheets. You know, I type in a bunch of numbers, I want a sum. And
Right.
That's a real easy way to get it.
And
Use that for my taxes, you know, add up all my deductibles.
what a lot of people don't realize is that in mathematics, there's another operator, a capital pi, product. Multiply a bunch of numbers together. Pi is the Greek equivalent of p.
That letter A for the row,
Yeah.
it has to be there. You can't change that A and say that's
No.
spending money, or you can't put text in there.
No, in that case, what you would want to do